Okay, how's it guys? Let's get started on urbanization. So the first thing we need to do is look at some definitions of what we mean by urbanization. So urbanization is the idea that there are just more and more people that are found or living in urban areas, and there are, as a result, less and less people being wanting to live in rural areas. The second two definitions we're going to look at. The one is the level of urbanization, and the second is the rate of urbanization. So the first one, the level of urbanization, is where you are right now. It's the current percentage of your population that lives in urban areas as opposed to rural areas. And the second one, the rate of urbanization, is how fast is this process taking place? What's the pace? What's the speed at which urbanization is taking place? So that's the starting point for our section or chapter 5. Now, if you look at the global trends, you will see this is from 2016, so it's obviously it will be different today, and there'll be more. The graphs will, the numbers will be higher, the percentages will be much higher. But you can see how the urban population was extremely small until the Industrial Revolution. And after the Industrial Revolution, we really saw the takeoff of urban areas and cities and towns becoming really large. And pretty much halfway through the 1800s, once the Industrial Revolution had kind of given way to industrialization, then you had these massive spikes in the percentage of people living in rural areas. Okay, so moving on, we can now just look at what's going on in the world today, so we can see how big cities actually are getting. These are just to give you an idea of what's cooking on the global scene. Tokyo is the biggest, has the largest urban population right now, 38 million. That's quite a lot of people. Lagos in Nigeria, it's the biggest African city with 21 million people living in Lagos in Nigeria. Cairo is huge as well, 19 million people. And then Joburg in South Africa, where you stay, there are about 8 million inhabitants, or depending on how you measure, it's still a very large city. So the global trend is that cities are getting larger, and the African trend is that the rate of urbanization is increasing. So more and more people are wanting to live in cities, and the population of cities is growing. Now, we need to just brush up a bit on some of the functions that are found in our cities. Now, we talked about in rural geography, we learned that rural areas mostly have primary activities taking place. So in urban areas, we have secondary, tertiary, and quaternary activities taking place, or these functions taking place. And usually it's a combination of all of these. And what we're finding these days is that tertiary and quaternary functions are becoming more dominant. And usually cities are a mix of all of these. And as we go up that urban hierarchy to the megalopolis, the top ones, the conurbation, and the megalopolis, you find that the functions get more and more complex as we go along. So just a reminder, the secondary functions on the top left there, that's your industry, your manufacturing, your making and building things. The tertiary functions are your services, like education, banking, transportation, and then your quaternary functions are the kind of trade and collection and transfer of data or information. So any fields involved in IT or data analysis, big data, those are all quaternary functions. And cities, as we know, the more developed, if we look at more developed countries, the MEDCs, then we find that they are heavily invested in tertiary and quaternary functions. Okay, so now we're going to look at 6 different examples of cities. This is the last section of this chapter. And this is where we classify cities based on their function. So many cities developed around a certain function. For example, Johannesburg. So nothing was going on in Johannesburg until the discovery of gold late into the 1800s. And Johannesburg sprang up based on the gold mining primary activity. So it started off as a gold mining town, but has now expanded into other functions too. So each town or urban settlement usually has these this function we can look back, and the central function to it. Some of them will also have a mix of these functions as well. So the first one we're going to look at is the central place town. And now all towns and cities are central places. They provide services to people in the surrounding areas. People living around the central place will come to that central place to access these services and functions. And the example here we look at is Bloemfontein in the Free State, which gives those living around it a place to access services and goods. That's why people come to the central place. It attracts those from around it. The second example is a trade and transport city, and we're going to be looking at Durban in KwaZulu-Natal as an example. Trade and transport cities are those that spring up around places where trade and transport originally happened. Now we know that Durban is a natural port, a natural harbor, and there are lots of natural resources in KwaZulu-Natal that a harbor makes sense to extract these and put them onto ships and get them out and transport them all over the world, or also to bring in and to import things. They arrive at the harbor and we can then transport them into South Africa. So an example of when you have a city springing up around an airport would be called an aerotropolis. And an example of that in KwaZulu-Natal is King Shaka International Airport, where there's a IDZ set up there. There's a whole lot of office parks, and there's kind of a massive settlement that has sprung up. Usually the services and functions that operate at a trade and transport city are like harbors or ports or railway. These operate 24/7. And there might be a mix of other industrial parks or offices. The third one to look at is break of Bulk Point. This is a great example of this is in Saldanha Bay, where in the Western Cape, where iron ore is transported from a town called Sishen, 800 kilometers away. It arrives at the harbor of Saldanha Bay, and then the iron ore is transferred onto ships. So break of Bulk Point is when you take goods from one form of transport and you switch them to another type. So example is you take things from rail and put them on a ship, or you take things from an airplane and you put them on a truck, or you take them from a truck and put them on a train. That's break of Bulk Points. The other thing to consider with break of Bulk Points, the definition of it is it's whether the volume of goods being handled changes or gets reduced. So at Saldanha Bay, they take these massive train loads of iron ore and then they split them up into multiple ships, so they reduce the volume of goods being handled. The fourth one is a specialized city. So the example we're going to look at is Phalaborwa in Limpopo. Now, a specialized city is one that just has a specialized function. It's there for a great specialist function. And Phalaborwa specializes in copper mining and copper processing, the processing of copper ore. And this mine in Phalaborwa is actually the biggest man-made pit mine in Africa. But other examples of specialized cities would be cities with, say, a mining focus, an IT focus, or a big tourist focus. They serve a particular specialized function. Sishen, we talked about that as well. Sishen is also a specialist mining town, just the same as Phalaborwa is. But they coexist with other central place functions. So there will still be a central place for others. They probably have some basic services there as well that you can access to as people coming from outside that town. The fifth one is a junction town. In this case, we're looking at De Aar in the Northern Cape. Now, De Aar is this critical junction where you've got a north-south railway line connecting to an east-west railway line in South Africa. So you can transfer goods that were traveling from north to south. You can now transport them east to west. There's also a major road that passes through De Aar. And what's interesting is De Aar is that now other things have sprung up as well. So you've got a solar farm, interesting solar developments happening as well in De Aar, and the usual functions that you would find in a town. The final one we're going to look at is a gap or a gateway town, and these are towns that spring up where there's a physical gap or a gap in a mountain range, basically, where you have to go through that gap if you want to go to another place. And the example is of Worcester in the Western Cape. Now, Worcester is just located near the Hex River Mountains in the background of this picture. And there is this natural gap that the Hex River has created through the mountains. So they have built the N1 road, which allows people to travel now through the Hex River Mountains and through this gap or this gateway into the interior of South Africa. And there's a railway line, there's a road there, and there are many examples of this in South Africa, but also in other countries of the world where you have these mountain ranges with a natural gap inside them, or a pass that allow people to transfer goods or vehicles on a road or a railway line. So those are your 6 types of cities. You need to be able to give examples of them and how they work or why they are called that. And next time we will move on to chapter 5, which is the urban hierarchy. Thank you very much.